Hello, good morning everyone. I'll be talking about, so I changed the title a little bit. I'll be talking about the axial vector as well as the scalar bottom charm tetraquarks from lattice QCD. So this work was done in collaboration with Neelmani Mathur from TIFR and Padmanath, who's in the audience from IMSC. So before moving on to the actual work, let's motivate it a little bit from EIC perspective. So we know that the EIC so this ring is going to be the EIC at BNL. So it is high luminosity, polarized. It has electron EP and EA collider. And the center of mass is between 20 to 141 GeV. We saw a lot of wonderful talks in this conference about probing the nucleon spin and the three-dimensional structure. But then what about spectroscopy at EIC? So what are the XYZ states? So in the heavy meson spectroscopy, there are many, the spectrum itself is really interesting because we don't know a lot of things. So this is an example of the spectrum of the CC bar spectrum with different quantum numbers on the x-axis and on the y-axis the mass. And we see experimentally the yellow plots, they are well understood, whereas there are many other states which are shown in the red and in the pink, which are not well understood. And then there are many predicted ones which have been undiscovered. So these XYZ states, which were surprise discoveries, which do not actually, it's not predicted by the standard Charmonium models using this simple Cornell potential. So there are many possible explanations for this. Either it could be like multi-quark resonances, hadronic molecules, or it could either be just kinematic effects. So it is very important to understand the spectrum a little more clearly in both the experimental and the theoretical side to make some progress on this. So as an example, I've zoomed in on one of the XYZ states, which is the Z sub C 3900. So this was seen in BEST 3 in this channel, E plus E minus goes to a pi pi and a J psi. It was also seen in other channels, DD star pi final states as well, which is very close to the threshold. If you look at the quark content, it's got 4 quarks, it's got hidden charm, CC bar, and a UD bar. So such quarks, which we know about like the two quark states, which are mesons, and the 3 quark states, which are baryons, they are well understood, but then such combinations of 4 quarks inside a bound state, it's not well understood. So tetraquarks are a good avenue to explore. And why would EIC help? It's because most of these XYZ states have not been observed in photo production. So EIC provides this opportunity where it can be seen in photo production experiments. And because it's got polarized beam and high luminosity, it is expected to give a more relatively clean environment. For more details on this, I've listed all these references. If interested, anyone can have a look. Okay. So since I mentioned that these XYZ states can be, it's possible to see at the EIC, let's see what are the other tetraquarks that are interesting. One of the examples would be the TCC, which is very similar to Z sub C, because in the Z, we have a CC bar and a UD bar, whereas in the TCC, instead of CC bar, we have an open CC and a U bar and a D bar. So relatively, I mean, they are very similar, and we just don't know what kind of structure they have. Either it could be a compact tetraquark where all the 4 quarks are very tightly bound, or it could be something like a molecular state where there are 2 quarks which are like meson and the other one, and they are like loosely bound. So it is very important to know these. Know both these types of tetraquarks a little more clearly, both in experiment and from the theoretical side. So let's see what is happening at the TCC. So TCC was recently discovered by LHCb in 2021. It's like as we saw, it's got like double CC content, so doubly heavy tetraquark, and it's really long-lived. So since experiments are already seeing such tetraquarks, let's see what are the other tetraquarks that can be seen currently by experiments such as LHCb. And also it is worthwhile to see what theory would tell us about these states. On the theoretical side, because these states are hadronic states, and in this scale, perturbation theory doesn't really work. Currently, lattice QCD is like one of the best techniques to study such states with control systematics. So what we do basically in lattice QCD is we try to solve the QCD path integral using Monte Carlo importance sampling. This integral over the gauge fields are done using the Monte Carlo sampling, and we need basically a lot of computation, high performance computing to calculate these integrals, whereas the fermionic integral is just done analytically. But then there are a few caveats. One of them is like lattice QCD is done with a finite lattice spacing that helps us to regularize a theory, and it was also done in a finite box because using something like a periodic boundary condition. So one of them is we use finite lattice spacing, and for that, what generally in our calculations, what we do is we calculate the physical value of physical observables for different lattice spacings and try to do a continuum limit. And the fact that it is we are working in a finite volume, as we learned in quantum mechanics, because of finite volume, you can't really have scattering states. The states are all discretized. But then we'll use the fact that we are working in a finite volume to our advantage by actually, there is a mapping between the finite volume of the lattice to the infinite volume amplitudes that we see in experiments. And this method is known as Lucher's method. So what we do is, so first, this is the workflow as shown in the second part of the slide. First, we calculate the finite volume spectrum, which is our discrete states. And then what we do is we do this Lucher's formalism, which is a mapping from these discrete states to the amplitude. And then we analytically continue the amplitudes to look for poles, etc., in the amplitude, which corresponds to bound states or resonances. So let us see what lattice QCD has already done with respect to tetraquarks. So, for example, the BB U bar D bar, which is in the isospin 0, 1 plus channel, this is an example of all the lattice QCD calculations that have been done. So, in this plot, what I've shown is various groups which have calculated the binding of the BBUD using NRQC lattice techniques, and then we see that they are more or less converging to a result. Same in the case of BB, U bar, S bar, 0 plus channel, we see that there are different calculations. The one that I've highlighted is the calculation done by the Indian group here. And then, so we see that they are more or less converging. And in fact, like these states, since it's got doubly heavy bottom quarks, they're expected to be really well below threshold and deeply bound. So because of that, when states are really deeply bound, we expect the finite volume effects or the multi-hadron effects to be very minimal. So because of that, we don't need to, as I mentioned here, we have to map it. This mapping is non-trivial, but then in this case, because it's deeply bound, we don't really need to do the mapping. And these are pretty well understood within lattice QCD, but then experimentally, these have not been seen yet. Maybe the energies are a little too high because it's got double bottom. So next, what we'll see is with the CC, U bar and D bar in the 0, 1 plus channel. So in this case, the state is a little more close to the threshold. So since it's not as deeply bound, we can expect the possible multi-hadron effects because it is slightly close to threshold. So we have to be a little more careful in lattice QCD for these calculations. Again, here I've plotted on the y-axis, I've plotted the binding energy, and over the x-axis is like all the different types of combinations of tetraquarks. So we see that there are quite a few calculations which have been done for the CC U bar D bar as well, and some of the lattice calculations, they are like pretty close to each other and they're converging on a result. But then since these states are very close to the threshold and there are significant multi-hadron effects, we should do the mapping, which is the Lucius method, from the discrete states to the infinite volume amplitudes. So this was, for the first time, it was done in this paper by Padmanath, where the Lucius mapping was done from the discrete states to get the infinite volume amplitude, and the pole analysis was done, and then well enough they find a pole in the amplitude and which actually corresponds to the pole that was seen, which corresponds to a bump that was seen at LHCb for the TCC. And there are many other recent calculations using the same, using the infinite volume amplitude within lattice QCD for the TCC as well, which I have shown here, the reference. So we talked about BB, UD, and then we've talked about CC. The intermediate, the particle which would be like in the intermediate between these two would be the BC U bar D bar. The energy here is like not too high as the BB, so it is possible that experiments such as LHCb can still look into these this energy regime. So here I've shown the status of the lattice calculation. So this state also is expected to be quite, it's not deeply bound, so it's expected to be a little close to threshold. Within lattice QCD, initially there were two studies, one in which the infinite volume amplitude was not extracted, and the other one did not have enough statistics to actually say something concrete about these states. But then recently, 2-3 months back, there have been like a new improved calculation which actually sees a bound state in this state, which I've not stated here, but then I'll state later on. So we are also doing the same. Our aim in this, so in this talk, what I'm going to explain is our calculation of the BC U bar D bar in the axial vector 0, 1 plus as well as 0 plus, the scalar channel. So so this is a little technical. This is the details of the lattice that we use. So what is important? The takeaway here would be that we are actually, so on the x-axis here, I've plotted like all the lattice spacing, which we have used. And on the y-axis is the different pion masses that we use. Yeah, so we see that we have 4 different lattice spacing, which helps us to actually extrapolate our results to A tends to 0. So we do the continuum extrapolation, and then we have different pion masses. Since in lattice QCD we generally do not work with the physical pion mass, we have various other, we have like all different pion masses, and then we try to extrapolate it to the physical point. So because we use so many lattices, this enables us to do so. And another important thing is we use exact isospin symmetry, so our U and D have the same mass. And next is like some details about the lattice calculation. This you might have seen in Neil Mani's talk. In order to get the energy spectrum, what we just calculate is the 2-point correlation function. And by we have a particle being created at some point in the lattice, and then time evolves, and then it gets annihilated at some other point. Since we work in Euclidean time, if we add a complete set of states and then do the spectral decomposition, we see that the correlation function falls off exponentially with respect to energy. So then we can actually fit the exponential of the correlator and then get out energies. But now the issue is like how to get out the ground state energy pretty reliably. What we do is we use a number of different operators for this. So then we have a matrix of, instead of a single correlation function, we have a matrix of correlation function, and then we use this technique called the generalized eigenvalue problem, which is basically like a it's like solving an eigenvalue problem. And what we do is we find the ideal combination of all the different operators that project to the ground state maximally. So since in this work, I'm only interested in the ground state, what I've done is I've just calculated the ideal, using GeVP, I calculate the ideal mixture of all the different operators that projects to the ground state. So that is what is being done, and this is an example of one of the energy level determination. So here what I've done is I've just plotted the log of the ratio because it's exponential. This would just give us the mass, which we call effective mass here. And as well enough, you see that there's a plateau in the correlation function that corresponds to the mass of the ground state. Here the effective mass of the ratio correlator basically. So this gives us so 0 would be so since it's the ratio, this would give us the deviation from the threshold. So the threshold basically just corresponds to 0 here, and the state that we are extracting is like how much deviation from the threshold we have. So next, after calculating the spectrum, as I explained, we have to do the infinite volume mapping, which is being done by Lucius method. So this is a simplified example of how, so in one-dimensional quantum mechanics, even in that, like how we can actually quantitatively understand like how Lucius method works. So if we have like a two particle in an infinite volume interacting through a finite potential, we know that the states here will be the state, it will just be like a plane wave. But then, whereas if we have a periodic boundary condition, and if we have like a finite volume well, we know that because of the boundary conditions, the momentum would be discretized. And this is the relation, but then these discrete momenta can be related to the phase shifts through this. This is just an example from quantum mechanics that we can derive. So the discrete momenta can actually be related to the phase shifts. So similarly, in Lucius condition, which is given by this determinant condition here, what we're doing is we get determinant of F inverse, where F is a well-known function. And M is F is a well-known function, and it depends on the discrete energy levels that we extract on the lattice, and whereas M is the parameterized amplitude, and this determinant is equal to 0. So using this, we can parameterize the amplitude in different ways, and since F depends on the energy levels, we can actually extract the amplitude M from these discrete energy levels. So now moving on to the results. So this is, as an example, I've given some of the finite volume spectra that we have extracted on the finest lattice that we use. Since what I've shown, we use a number of lattice spacing. This is an example at the finest lattice. And this is also the deviation from the threshold. And here, if you just look at the ground state, we see that there is a negative energy shift in the ground state, which already indicates that the ground state is below the threshold. So that kind of indicates that hints towards a bound state, but then still we need, so here is the ground states for all different volumes and pion masses that we extract for the axial vector case. And so the threshold is all normalized to 1 here. And then here also it's very evident that the ground state is below the threshold. So all this kind of hints us towards the possibility of a bound state. But then we'll have to extract the scattering amplitudes and actually look for poles in the scattering amplitudes to be sure. And that's what we do next. So here on the y-axis, what I've plotted is k cotangent delta, which is delta is a phase shift. So this is basically related to the amplitude in terms of the phase shift. And on the x-axis, I've just in the center of momentum square normalized by the energy. We see that, so here, so what I've plotted is for one particular mass, and the dashed line here corresponds to the condition for a bound state to exist, and the point where these our data points cross these lines, that is where like the pole in the amplitude would exist. So well enough, we see that this actually passes through that. So then there is a pole in the amplitude, which we further So this, I'm just flashing for all different pion masses and all different volumes that we study. So what we first do is we calculate the K cotangent delta, and then after that what we do is for each of the pion masses that we use, we extrapolate it to the continuum, which is the lattice spacing 0. And then after that, for the different pion masses, we actually do the chiral extrapolation to the physical point, physical light quark mass. And then we actually see a bound state in this axial vector channel, which hints towards a bound TBC, which could be seen in experiments. And we get a binding of minus 43 MeV with like statistical, as shown here, I've shown statistical and systematic errors. And then similarly, if we do the same exercise for the scalar channel, we see very similar results. So these are for all the different, so I use the same volumes and the same pion masses for this as well. So here also we see a negative energy shift in the ground state, hinting towards the presence of a bound state. And again, we do the same, we calculate the K cotangent delta, the phase shifts using our Lucius formalism, and then do the continuum extrapolation and the chiral extrapolation at the physical point. And here also we get like a binding of minus 42 with respect to the BD threshold here. So this is for the scalar channel. Yeah. And here I've just listed out like all the different calculations that have been done for this TBC binding energy results. So on top, what we see is the top panel, it just shows the different model results. And then the last two is our work for the TBC, and one of them is another lattice work which came out recently, which also finds a bound state in this, both in the scalar and axial vector channel. So we see that the lattice QCD results are slowly coming to the result that there is a bound state. But then models currently, they seem to be, some of them predict that there's a bound state, some of them predict that there is no bound state. So theoretically, we need like improved calculations and more effort in this direction to understand if what QCD actually tells us about these states. And we see that lattice QCD kind of plays an important role by saying whether these things exist in QCD or not. And yeah, with this, I would come to the end of my talk. So these tetraquarks are very interesting candidates which can be studied both in experiments and in theoretical role of lattice QCD is also important in these efforts. And the TCC, which was discovered in 2021, was a major breakthrough, and possibly this would actually motivate experimental searches and even more precise lattice QCD calculations. Thank you.
You just mentioned in the beginning that you needed, you wanted to use photo production. Is there a reason for why photo production is?
Yeah, so basically it provides like a clean, so like 3-body channels, like in HADRON, like there'll be like a lot of background. That is one of the reasons. And photo production is probably cleaner. That's a
okay, that's just what you, okay.
Yeah, and then high
But it could be MEQ squared.
Yeah.
Okay. And is there some tension between the lattice results here, or?
So initially, there were like 2 calculations which do not say anything clearly, but I think like, so recently there's been some of the authors in the other calculation have been in this like new calculation, which has a little more precise result. And I think like slowly we are converging to a result.
Okay.
Thank you.